All right. Thank you for joining us today. We are talking to Stacey Satterlee, the Executive Director of the Idaho Grain Producers Association. So I am Brittany. I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho Wheat Commission. We're joined by Ryan Mortensen, who is the Manager of Programs and Communications for the Wheat Commission. And Stacey, we just want to talk about a little bit about a legislative session wrap up, predictions for next session maybe. But before we do that, let's go ahead and start. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? If there's more you want to say, you can also introduce IGPA. What does IGPA do as an organization? What's your relationship to the Wheat Commission? Why do we have two different organizations?
Perfect. Well, my name is Stacey. You said it. I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho Grain Producers. We are a separate organization from the Wheat Commission. We do get questions, not infrequently, that suggest like, oh, but I pay a wheat assessment. Aren't I a member of IGPA? And the answer is no. If you pay your wheat assessment, you get all of the benefits that the Wheat Commission provides, right? The Wheat Commission focuses on research and market development and grower education. And honestly, IGPA has a little bit of overlap. We work together on grower education and communication, but IGPA fills a niche that the commissions can't. Commissions cannot lobby or do advocacy work. There are rules around where you can spend assessment dollars, and lobbying is one of the places where you cannot. So it's actually interesting. Historically, IGPA was established a couple of years before the Wheat Commission was established, when growers got together and said we would benefit from an assessment from investing these dollars for the industry. So first they formed IGPA, and then 2 years later they passed, I'm pointing out my window at the Capitol, they went to the State House and passed the statute that formed the Idaho Wheat Commission. So we've always worked closely together. We've also always had a good working relationship, and we're happy to continue that on today. IGPA is a membership-driven organization, so you have to actively join IGPA, which you can do online. We can put a link with this posting. It's a very affordable investment, considering the issues that we work on are truly bottom line kind of issues. This last legislative session, anything from tax issues, property tax issues, watering infrastructure investments, truly kind of bottom line issues are what we're working on at the State House. And then in Washington, D.C., this year's a farm bill year. And in a farm bill, you've got things like crop insurance, you've got things like conservation programs, and just issues that are really critical to wheat growers' bottom lines. So those are the kind of issues that we're working on every day at IGPA.
And I was gonna ask a follow-up question, but you kind of answered those with your introduction to IGPA regarding the who, the what IGPA is, and information behind the membership. So getting to the legislative part of the conversation, we know there were more than.
Wait, Ryan, can we go back to membership?
Yeah.
For just a minute? Stacey, how do you tell growers that they should be members of IGPA, and why that's so important?
Sure. So at the State House and in Washington, D.C., well, let's focus on the State House first. We have a citizen legislature, right? So that means our legislature is not full-time. Legislators come to Boise to, their constitutional obligation is to set a budget, a balanced budget for the state of Idaho. And so what you have are you've got regular everyday people. You've got farmers and ranchers, you've got doctors, you've got lawyers, you've got business owners that come to town, and they don't know everything necessarily about growing wheat and what it takes to run a business, to run an agribusiness, to run a farm in Idaho. So as bills come up, we are part of a group called Legislative Advisors. So our citizen legislators don't have staff. They have to vote on everything. They vote on education, they vote on transportation, they vote on healthcare, and they look to legislative advisors and their constituents when they are voting on issues that impact your bottom line. So you all are farming, right? Our constituents, the wheat commissions and IGPA's constituents are wheat farmers and barley farmers in the state of Idaho. You all cannot be at the house every day working on these issues and following these bills. And the same is in Washington, D.C. We have affiliates in D.C. And frankly, none of us can spend all of our time in D.C. So that's why it's important to be a member of IGPA. We are your voice on these issues that are critical to your bottom line, both at the State House here in Boise and in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. as policy choices are being made, as policy decisions are being made. So the other thing that we do is we help connect growers to their lawmakers. So, and we also want to keep you informed, right? There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts that could impact your business. And again, it would be very difficult for one person to track all of it while they're farming. So you become a member, you receive communications from us, alerts, opportunities to weigh in. We invite you to our meetings and you can meet your legislators locally or here. So that's really why it's critical to have a voice. You should know that others have voices here in the State House too. There are lobbyists that represent every interest, and your interest as a farmer in the state of Idaho is as important, right? So you deserve to have representation there too. So really that's what IGPA does. We're working every day on those bottom line issues, the foundational issues for Idaho agriculture and Idaho wheat and barley farmers, so that you don't have to be here doing it and that you have a voice, you have a say in all this.
So who should be members? I mean, what do you say to someone who says, well, I only grow wheat every 3 years in my cropping system as a rotation crop, or I only have 350 acres of wheat, so it really doesn't matter that much? Or what do you say to that? And does it matter your membership, the membership dues? Are those based on production? Are they based on acres planted? Or how are those figured? And are there certain sizes of farms or producers that maybe should focus more on membership in IGPA?
So those are all great questions, and I'll try to answer them. If I don't catch them all, we'll follow back up. So I would suggest that every wheat farmer in the state of Idaho should be a member of IGPA. It really strengthens our position when we can go meet with legislators and say we are the voice of Idaho's wheat and barley industry, with legislators, with the governor's office, with the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. So again, everybody kind of receives the benefits of us doing that work. So we would certainly welcome everybody to come be a member of the conversation, help us set our priorities, help us work through our policies that guide our organization, and be involved. We offer just a screaming deal for membership. When I look at other states, I look at Kansas, I look at other big wheat producing states, most of their dues are based on production. They're based on acreage, they're based on volume. And so, your membership dues are going to adjust accordingly. If you're farming a lot of acres, if you have a lot of volume, your dues will be higher than somebody who is not. We have a flat fee system. So it does not matter if you are a 100-acre farmer or a 10,000-acre farmer, your membership dues are $75. So there are opportunities for additional engagement within that membership structure, but get your foot in the door, flat fee. We've made it real easy to join online. We have people send us checks still to join every year. So we try to make it really easy. And I would suggest that there's an equal amount of value to be found across sizes of farms, right? You are a larger operation, you have a lot at stake, but there's a lot at stake for smaller operations too. I think one thing that's interesting to note, you're right. A lot of farmers are not just wheat farmers, right? This is part of a cropping system. They are also potato growers. They are also sugar beet growers. They grow pulses, they grow canola. Here in Boise, we work very closely together with all of those trade associations. So a lot of times you might be getting twice the advocacy if you're both a member of the Snake River Sugar Beet Growers Association and the Idaho Grain Producers Association. We are all part of Food Producers of Idaho. During session, we meet weekly as ag lobbyists. We meet weekly as food producers to look at all of these pieces of legislation and determine their impact on Idaho agriculture, and then take positions accordingly. And then our individual organizations are lobbying. You know, we are spending our time over at the State House to ensure the outcomes that are important for Idaho agriculture. So to me, it makes a lot of sense that if you grow, sugar beets and grain, you would be a member of both organizations and be active there, because again, you can be sure that folks in other areas of industry and business, and even people who have opposing positions than we do, have trade associations, have groups that they're active with, have lobbyists over at the State House advocating for their positions as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Ryan, for letting me
Oh,
interrupt
yeah.
you. And
No
I hand
problem.
it back to you now.
So gearing our conversation towards the legislative session, Stacey, we know that we had over 50 new legislators, both on the House and Senate side. Can you tell us how such a large turnover had any impact on the session this year?
It definitely did have an impact. There were so many new faces. It ended up being a slow start. And I think it was largely because there were so many new people to acclimate, right? To get here's how we run committees. Here's the committees you're on. Here's when they meet. Here's how we introduce legislation. Here's how we hear rules. There was a really significant learning curve. And also for those of us that lobby, there's just a lot of new people to get to know. I think one thing that we saw across the board was there was a huge need for education. Idaho has always been an agricultural state, and agriculture has enjoyed certain, just a level of base knowledge, right? And I think this is true outside of the legislature. It is so critical for us to educate and tell our stories. And we really saw that in kind of the microcosm of the State House, where it used to be most people were maybe one generation removed from a farm. People are now 2 and 3 generations removed from a farm, and they don't have a direct connection, and they don't understand the issues that impact farm in our state. So we saw a huge need to get to know people. Another thing that I'd say is one of the reasons we had so many new faces was because of redistricting. And increasingly, as our state changes and we see more dense population centers, we will see fewer agricultural districts, and we will see more legislators who come from more urban backgrounds and more urban areas, which is to say, some of those legislators can be our best friends, but they need to be educated, right? We need to bring them in and make sure they understand how policies will impact agriculture. So it was a huge deal that there were so many new people. It really led to kind of, again, we started in kind of fits and starts. We didn't see a lot of legislation make it all of the way through both the House and the Senate until even the 9th or 10th week. It was really a slow start in terms of seeing legislation all the way through. But then once it started going, it moved pretty quickly after that.
What were the highs? for IGPA, for the grain and for the wheat industry? What were the highs that came out of this session?
So I think there were a number of highs. The governor came into the session really wanting to make some critical investments for our state. And one of the things that we supported was his investment in the launch program. So Representative Megan Blanksma introduced a bill. Basically, it's going to open the door for a lot more kids to go on to get career and technical training. It's not our big four-year institutions as the way the bill ended up being. It was amended in the Senate. There was a trailer bill that came along with the launch program that put some sideboards around it. But it's going to help Idaho's kids go on beyond high school and hopefully come away with degrees that line up with our workforce needs in the state. And again, a lot of those are going to be kind of technical careers when you look at where our workforce is headed. So those were bills that Idaho Agriculture supported, and we were glad to see it across the finish line. Another big priority was property tax relief. And, IGPA looked at that from the perspective of our agricultural landowners and our rural communities. And, a lot of the focus on property taxes is homeowners exemptions and how this is going to impact homeowners. And that's good and fine. But we really wanted to work to make sure this wasn't a tax shift onto agricultural landowners. And the way this bill was structured, the goal is to pay down some bonds and levies so that some of those taxes on agricultural producers' land go down over time. So it ended up being a pretty good compromise bill. I'll tell you, the governor vetoed it the first time he saw it because there were some technical glitches with the bill that would have limited our state's ability to bond for road projects. So that was an unintended consequence. So the governor also felt like the bill was a little more complex than it needed to be. It did some other things. It was a complicated bill, but the House and Senate overrode his veto and then passed that trailer bill to fix that technical glitch. So that bill became law. So that was a big deal, just generally in terms of issues of priority. We were excited to see the investment in water and infrastructure. One of the things IGPA has been a part of is we were active with the governor's salmon work group, and coming out of that work group, there was a recommendation that the state invest in a pipeline directly cold fresh water from Shack Dam into the hatchery. And it was a little bit of, gosh, that'd be great if we could do it, but it's just going to cost a lot of money. So we might not be able to do it. And with this money, that's going to be one of the things they're able to do as part of House Bill 361. So not only was it just a good overall investment in water and infrastructure in our state, but it also includes that money that will impact our hatcheries and our fisheries in the state, which is good news. We were able to get a partner of ours, Jaime Agado, in front of the Senate Resources Committee to make a presentation on the Hatch Partner, which is the salmon rearing boxes, salmon egg rearing boxes. If you haven't seen that presentation, maybe we'll have to do another one of these and let Jaime tell you all about the Hatch Partner. But basically, it's really exciting. Again, in terms of taking those hatchery eggs, and rather than raising them in a hatchery, you can raise them right in the stream, and it really reduces costs and raises more resilient fish. And it was great to get that in front of the legislature. So that was kind of a high. I think the last one I'd mention is we worked really hard to make progress on fencing this year. We had a bill, Senator Mark Harris's bill on fencing. We were able to have growers here for the hearing. It was during our February legislative meeting here in Boise. And so we had growers testify. Idaho Cattle Association supports the bill. The Idaho Farm Bureau supports the bill. Idaho Grain Industry supports the bill. It made it out of committee. It made it off the Senate floor, and it got caught up in the House and didn't end up making progress. So I'd say that was an equal parts highlight and low light of the session. One, we made progress. We had really strong support. Great to have growers there to see the process. And then ultimately we were not successful. So that was definitely a low, especially considering the broad industry support for changing and updating Idaho's laws. That's definitely going to be one that we'll revisit in the interim. Senator Harris has committed that we can continue these conversations and bring back a bill next year that hopefully we can get across the finish line.
Were there any other bills that you had hoped would pass or progress, or any other lows that you came away with?
Yeah, there were a few others. We were part of a really broad effort on driver's authorization cards. This is another one of those kind of educational moments. I always kind of assume that there's a foundational level of knowledge about the ag workforce. And I think the dairy industry really leads on this, that many in agriculture struggle to find a labor force. And in particular for dairy and livestock, those cows have to be milked every day, they have to be fed every day. So it's a little bit different for grain, but during harvest, we need grain cart drivers, we need operators, we need, so this is an issue for us. It's definitely more of a pressing everyday issue for the dairy industry and those in livestock, but we supported a bill. It made it out of committee with no recommendation in the Senate, which was a huge step forward. It's never made it out of committee. It stopped there, didn't get voted on in the Senate floor. It didn't go to the House. So then there was a joint memorial introduced that just highlighted the need for Washington, D.C. to update our immigration laws. And it called out Idaho agriculture. It called out all the industries that are impacted by this. We couldn't get that across the finish line either. So our immigration system is broken. And I think there's broad acknowledgement that that's the case. There's very little that we can do within the state of Idaho. This is a federal problem, right? This is a national issue. This effort led by Senator Guthrie, Senate Bill 1081, was us in Idaho saying, we can't fix the problem, but we can do this. We can make sure all drivers in the state of Idaho have taken a driver's test. They have a license to drive and they're insured, right? Those are the things that driver's authorization card would allow or require. And it would mean that we have safer roads, and people driving on our roads would have taken a driver's test and have a license and have insurance. So it's not a perfect solution. It's certainly not the solution to the overall problem, but it's something we could do in our state. And it was pretty disappointing to not be able to move forward either with that bill or even with the joint memorial urging the federal delegation to make this a priority issue in Washington, D.C.
What do you think was the biggest pushback against that? Was it just not understanding that this is not, it's not a threat to voting? It's not. Is it just like you were talking about that baseline understanding or baseline knowledge of how businesses in agriculture are run, especially dairies or even row crop farms? Do you think how much of that played in and how much of it was kind of this unnecessary concern for other social issues?
I definitely think both of those things were at play. In the committee hearing, you had legislators bringing up both of those kinds of points. One, why don't you just hire people in your community? Why don't you hire prisoners? Why don't you hire, there's still a certain 3% unemployment in our state. Surely you can hire people. So part of it's just a lack of understanding. We do try to hire people. There's not a lot of people that will do this work, do agricultural work, whether it's on a dairy or on a row crop farm. It is hard to find good help. It's impossible to find good help. The H-2A program is really difficult to work with. So that was part of it. The other part, I hit the nail on the head. There are some unfounded fears about what this bill would do. this bill would not, this driver's authorization card would not get you on an airplane. It does not give you the right to vote. It does not give you the right to buy a firearm. This is not, this is not like a real driver's license in that way. This looked different. It was oriented different. It would never be mistaken for something you could use to vote with. And we had communication with the Secretary of State's office to verify that that was the case. So those are not real fears. Again, I think the information that is really compelling is safer roads for everybody, right? And making sure that people who are driving now, which we can all be assured there are people driving now who don't have these cards and haven't taken a driver's test and are driving in fear. You see in other states that pass this, fewer hits and runs, fewer people leaving the scenes of accidents. You do see fewer crashes, right? And a higher rate of insured drivers. So there's a lot of good that can come of it. It is hard not to get caught up into the broader kind of emotional argument of immigration. And we tried to be very clear that this is not us making a judgment call on why or how long people have been here or whether or not we think they should be here. The fact is they are here and they are working often in agriculture and construction and hospitality businesses, road building. I mean, these individuals are an integral part of our state and our community, and giving them the ability to come out of the shadows a little bit and have a driver's license feels like a really reasonable step to take. But it did end up getting bogged down in those concerns and in those fears. I'll tell you, it was pretty moving. It's led by kids. It's Senator Guthrie's bill, and it's FFA students in American Falls that really led the charge here. They see a need. They see this as a potential solution, and the result is really moving testimony from kids and families that would be directly impacted by this. So I don't know if we'll see another bill next year, but surely this issue isn't going away. We haven't resolved it either at the federal level or the state level to the extent that we could. So,
were there any priority issues that were introduced? And did they or will they have any impact on Idaho farmers and ranchers?
I mean, really, we've kind of touched on quite a few of them. There's an educational component to rural Idaho. There was a rural nurses loan repayment bill that we supported. So if you're a farmer and you're injured, you need nurses at hospitals and at your doctor's offices. So that's one of those that's not maybe directly in line, or you would think like, oh, why are we weighing in on that healthcare bill? But we've supported rural teachers initiatives and bills to incentivize teachers in our rural communities because there's just so much interplay, right? I mean, our farmers are rural communities in Idaho, and we do need to have healthcare available close by. We do need to have quality education opportunities for those kids. So we certainly supported some of those bills. Again, on the education front, the launch program is going to be important with its career technical, workforce driven, training and education incentives. We care a lot about infrastructure and bridges and roads and water, and all of those got a lot of attention this session. So, and those will impact local, farmers as you are hauling your grain on roads in your county and your state roads. So all of this stuff is important stuff. Those are really kind of the big buckets, that we look at this session.
Okay.
There were a few bills that were introduced this session that could be potentially detrimental or damaging to Idaho's commodity commissions, like the Wheat Commission. Can you just speak to those and what came of those bills and the conversation and I guess education that you participated in?
Absolutely. There were a handful of bills, but really one that ended up taking up most of the space in the conversation. It started out as House Bill 12, and then some changes were made and it was reintroduced as House Bill 170. And that bill came from Representative Jason Monks. And the fact is, I'm willing to say there's some merit to what he was looking to do. He asked the question, why do I go to a rodeo and Department of Health and Welfare is sponsoring a rodeo? Why do I go to community events and our taxpayer dollars are being spent in ways that may or may not immediately be apparent as to why, right? Like, why is that a good investment of taxpayer dollars? So that's really the kind of the question, as I saw it, that was trying to be answered by these pieces of legislation. So House Bill 170 would have prohibited state departments. So really the focus is state agencies, but as a self-governing state agency, commissions were lumped into this, whether intentionally or unintentionally, probably unintentionally. But it said that state agencies cannot sponsor or donate to non-government entities unless it's required by law or approved by the governor. What? What? Why? That's a big part of what commodity commissions do, is invest grower dollars and leverage those dollars by working with partners, whether it's the wheat marketing center, whether it's our relationship working together, whether it's the Wheat Foods Council. A lot of what you'll do is, there was a debate then further in the Senate to try to find sponsorships and donations, and that made the conversation even way more complicated. It just started out, again, kind of maybe questioning, why do I see this? Is this the best use of taxpayer dollars? And it really, what maybe should have been a scalpel then was a machete, right? And it took in all commodity commissions and really made us think, gosh, as it went through additional iterations, it then became, every commodity commission would have to submit a report to the Legislative Services Office, and every executive director would have to approve every expense, which is probably already happening. And you all do submit your finances. You are a quasi-state agency, so all that information is readily available and you all are very transparent. But it just added layers and layers of work, and getting the governor's office to sign off on every donation or sponsorship. I don't know that they wanted that kind of work. That would be a lot of administrative work to do behind the scenes when we're really talking about kind of day-to-day run-of-the-mill work that our commodity commissions do. There was another bill, House Bill 91, that said no agency or state department could pay any fees or membership. So again, maybe that was well intended. This legislator was Representative Heather Scott, stood up and said, I see all these state agencies spending money and going on trips, and why are they having these memberships, and why are they paying dues? And thankfully, somebody else on that committee, Representative Green, said, she works for her real job, not being legislator. She works for ACHD, the Idaho County Highway District. And she said, I know at ACHD, we have memberships and subscriptions that keep us up to date on best practices for engineering and for road building. And that's the same for the commission and the Barley Commission. You all are the stewards of these grower dollars. You invest them wisely and you partner and we leverage, and not being able to do that without a whole bunch of paperwork or sign-offs or intense scrutiny from submitting it all to the Department of Financial Management for approval or for LSO for reporting. It felt like there was quite a few bills. Again, their focus was not intentionally or not on its surface to impact agriculture commodities, but all of these bills would have swept them in, and it would have made doing the commission's job a lot harder, if not impossible. And it really showed a lack of understanding about what commissions do, how they leverage grower dollars, why being able to partner with other organizations is important. And just saying you can't donate or sponsor, or you can't have a membership, or you can't pay dues is really far too broad and limiting in terms of what our commissions do on behalf of the wheat industry in the state. So they died. That was, I guess, the bottom line is we were successful in having those bills not pass the House and Senate and be signed into law by the governor. So I don't doubt that the conversation isn't over, right? I think it's incumbent on us to continue educating about the good work our commissions do. Again, I go back to just that very foundational piece we started off talking about. Growers came together and realized there were things they couldn't do on their own. An individual grower, it's very difficult to invest in foundational research individually. They got together and said, we need a commission to work for the better of the industry. And so they basically said, let's put this assessment on ourselves. And we're going to do this for the industry. So educating legislators about that is really important. And we're going to keep working on it.
Overall thoughts on the session?
Again, so many new faces. A lot of really great people to get to work with, honestly. A lot of new great legislators with redistricting. A lot of old faces that came back around too, that we have in leadership positions and chairmanships. Overall, I think the session was successful. It took a lot of weeks, 10 weeks in before we started seeing bills get all the way across the finish line. So then it felt really frantic for the last handful of weeks because there was a lot of work to do. Again, I will say, again, for those who are not kind of in this bubble, a lot of the headlines there were a lot of headline catching issues that had nothing to do with agriculture. And I would even argue have nothing to do with what most Idaho wants the legislature to come and work on. A lot of time was spent on those issues. There were also really controversial educational issues that would impact rural schools in Idaho and would impact all of us who have kids in schools in Idaho. Really how to fund education in our state going forward, whether or not our state wants to move to a voucher system. There were multiple bills and lots of debate around that. And ultimately, those bills were not successful. But again, I don't think that issue is going away. And I guess my point in saying all of that is there was a lot of time devoted to issues outside of the issues we care a lot about. Libraries. Oh, for heaven's sake, we talked a lot about libraries at the legislature this year. We talked a lot about controversial headline getting issues. And those were what you saw on the news. But you have to know that aside from all of those issues, there was also budget setting, right? And we were looking at roads and bridges, and we were looking at water infrastructure and water projects and recharge projects in our state. So I guess that was kind of my takeaway. I'd go home and watch the news at night and be like, oh my gosh, they're focusing on these few really controversial headline things, but there's really a lot of important work going on over there too. So rest assured, there is important work going on, and we're there advocating. Again, on behalf of Idaho agriculture, in particular Idaho's wheat and barley farmers, as all these bills come up, and particularly on those commission bills, we're working very closely with other commodity commissions. Have a dog in that fight too. So it was not us going in alone having these conversations, but it was us partnering with our commission friends across other commodities to make sure those bills were not successful.
Stacey, this session seemed like a particularly long, drawn out legislative session, and it hasn't been over all that long. Our friends across the street have not been home for a real long time yet. And we probably want to just kind of let this session rest and recover from it. But looking ahead to next session, are there any bills or any pieces of legislation or any issues that you anticipate, either the good, the bad, and the ugly for next session?
Well, next session is an election year. So it's certain to be good and bad and ugly, right? There's certain to be those kinds of bills that people go home and talk about. For us, I think the big one that we're really focused on is fencing and trying to make some progress with our friends in the cattle industry and the Farm Bureau and Senator Harris here in the interim to, maybe shore up that bill. And if there were some concerns that came out in the end, make sure we have a bill that can get across the finish line next year. And not only that, this fencing bill we're looking at is really just a first step in what has to be a multi-step conversation. So we're hopeful to maybe even lay out a roadmap of this is the first step we want to take. This is the next step we want to take. This is the step after that, to try to ease some of these tensions between landowners, agricultural landowners, those green fields, and those cows on the other side. So that's really, I would say, really a top priority issue for IGPA going into the next session. Again, infrastructure is always a big deal. We're always following infrastructure and looking at those kinds of issues. But because it's an election year, one, the session is likely to be shorter because legislators want to go home. And the primary does not fall long after the session ends. So that's kind of good news. The session was 88 days and into April. Maybe it felt so long because it was loaded toward the end, right? It was slow at the beginning, and then there was so much activity, and we just knew there was so much to do as we got to week 11 and 12 and 13 and 14. So it wasn't actually much longer than an average session. It ended up being 88 days, and they only missed their target adjournment by a week or two. It felt long though, I think, because so much work was kind of pushed to the end. Also, we are living in a new world where there's a constitutional amendment that passed that allows the legislature to call themselves back into session. So all of us are kind of, those of us in this policy world are kind of waiting to see what that looks like. Does the legislature have reason enough at some point during this year to call themselves back? Yeah. At this point, it could happen any year. This is just the first year. So we're all kind of watching that and watching issues as they come up to see if we'll see them before January of 2024. And then again, like I said, it's an election year. So usually there's plenty of campaigning bills to go home on, or kind of, party driven pieces of legislation as people are going to go home and people are going to go to the ballot box. So it'll be fun. It'll be it'll be exciting, right? There will be fun and exciting things next session.
Always are.
Always. That's right.
Stacey, one last question. Any calls to action or anything we want to let our wheat growers know?
So the one call to action that's going on right now, and again, we can maybe put a link with this. It's a Farm Bill year. So lots of hearings in Washington, D.C., lots of meetings in Washington, D.C., lots of fly-ins for wheat growers and barley growers. So one of the programs that is really critical to our industry, and it particularly impacts our commission, our market development program. So it's the market access program and the foreign market development program. So those programs have had the same level of funding for like 30 years, the last
20
30,
years.
20 years.
20 years.
And if, you can think about what you could buy with $1 20 years ago versus what you can now, we could use an increase in funding for those programs. We certainly need to let Congress know how important those programs are. Those programs allow the government to work with cooperators, is what they're called, cooperators. So U.S. Wheat Associates is a cooperator. U.S. Wheat Associates works with the Wheat Commission to facilitate trade trips, trade teams, to bring trade teams here, to really work on that market development. So it leverages our grower dollars in our state. It leverages those federal dollars. It's a really sound investment for what we get back from that program. I want to say the return on investment is, do you remember off the top of your head? Is it $17 to every dollar spent? Is it $24 to every dollar spent? How about we drop that in the comments too? It's a really good return on investment in terms of federal dollars spent, the matching dollars that are required, and what we get back out of that program in terms of trade partnerships and increased market access for U.S. products, in particular U.S. wheat in this instance. So the programs have remained flatlined for their funding for years. That's $250 million for the market access program and $33.5 for the market development program. We are requesting an increase in funding, and we're starting out strong, requesting a doubling of funding. There are 2 bills out there. They're called marker bills that have been introduced in Congress that basically lay the groundwork for this being an issue in the Farm Bill. So the ask right now is to ask our congressional delegation to sign on to these marker bills to show support for the issue, so that when the writers of the Farm Bill come around, they see those marker bills out there and they see that this is a priority for a lot of states, for a lot of regions in the United States, for a lot of industries. So we do have that's the kind of the current call to action within the Farm Bill right now. I anticipate we will see a draft of the Farm Bill in coming weeks. And at that point, we will likely have another call to action or more calls to action on priority issues. The wheat industry's #1 priority, as you all heard a few weeks ago from NOG, is crop insurance and keeping crop insurance whole and making sure we have a safety net for wheat growers across the country. So if there's any threats to those programs, we'll certainly see a call to action on those. But for right now, it's supporting those trade development programs.
All right, thank you. I will also say that Stacey's work is not just kept to the first 3 months of the year, the first sometimes 4 months of the year, when the legislature is in session. The Idaho Wheat Commission and IGPA this year are taking a group of legislators, leadership from the House and the Senate side, and then also new legislators, ag committee members, to Portland in June for an export tour, so that we can show them really the value of the river system and the value of wheat exports. 50% of our export, or of our wheat, is exported, and that's really important on a state level. We don't have a way to do that really effectively on the federal level, but Stacey works hard, and we partner with the National Association of Wheat Growers as well to really educate legislators and members of Congress about trade issues, especially because you're growing wheat very consistently and it needs somewhere to go. So lots of work is being done on your behalf by IGPA and NOG, with help where we can from the Wheat Commission and US Wheat Associates. So hop on those links that are at the bottom to join IGPA and also to support that funding for trade programs, MAP and FMD. And thank you again so much, Stacey. And we will see you back here for our next From the Field in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.